In the passenger seat, curled like a silent sentinel, was his dog Gorion, a sable-coated Belgian Malinois with eyes that rarely blinked. Orion was not a pet, he was a trained guardian, a living tether to the world. Nathaniel kept slipping away. Nathaniel had left the army 6 years ago, but the war had never left him. Once a reconnaissance specialist in high-risk operations, he now lived in the shadows of memories he couldn't erase. The nightmares came often loud, choking, and real. Orion had been trained to sense the shifts in Nathaniel's breath, the tightening of his jaw, the twitch in his fingers before a flashback engulfed him. The dog had saved his sanity more times than he could count, and on nights like this, Orion was the only reason Nathaniel made it as far as the front desk. The lobby smelled of overused air freshener and faint disinfectant. The lights buzzed slightly, just enough to prick Nathaniel's nerves. The clerk behind the desk was a young man in his early 20s. His name tag read Tyler, and he looked half asleep, only jerking upright when Nathaniel placed his ID and reservation printout on. The counter, Orion sat still beside him, his vest clearly marked with service, "Animal do not distract." Nathaniel handed over his documents without a word, accustomed to the process by now. He had done this many times across many states. He knew the law, he had the certifications, and he carried everything in a worn leather folder like a soldier's badge of honor. Tyler barely glanced at the papers. Instead, he tapped at his keyboard and frowned. Without lifting his eyes, he said something that made Nathaniel's stomach clench. There would be an additional $250 pet fee. Nathaniel didn't speak right away. He had learned long ago that silence was his shield. Speaking too fast could trigger reactions, his or others. He simply reached into the folder and produced the official letter from his doctor, the training certifications and the legal printout, explaining that service animals were not subject to pet fees. He placed them on the counter like evidence in a trial he had already won too many times to count. Tyler's expression didn't change, typed more, shook his head and repeated, "The policy." His tone was dismissive. His eyes flicked to Orion with suspicion, not understanding that this dog was more than fur and obedience. To Tyler, this was just another traveler trying to bend the rules, and Nathaniel could already feel the old anxiety threading its way into his bloodstream. Note, Orion moved subtly, shifting his body so his shoulder pressed gently into Nathaniel's leg, a grounding technique. It worked like medicine. The world narrowed. Now, the buzzing light didn't seem so loud. The clerk's voice blurred at the edges. Nathaniel focused on Orion's steady breath. The young man said something about people faking service dogs. Something about the dog not looking like a medical animal. Nathaniel's hand curled around the edge of the counter. His throat tightened. This wasn't the first time he had been told he didn't look disabled. But it didn't hurt any less. He had wanted was a room for the night, a place to rest before visiting his cousin's memorial the next morning. A cousin who had served in the same unit, who hadn't made it home. And now, Nathaniel was being asked to pay a penalty for surviving, for needing help, for not bleeding. Where people could see, Nathaniel stood motionless as the silence between him and the clerk stretched. Orion remained by his side, unmoving, his brown eyes fixed on his handler like he was holding him in place. The boy behind the counter, a college student, maybe shifted uncomfortably but didn't back down. He repeated that store policy was clear. Animals were not allowed without the fee. Nathaniel finally exhaled, the breath long and controlled. His hand slowly reached for the folder again, but not to show more documents. He already knew this fight. He had lived it 100 times in coffee shops, airports, even grocery stores. People saw Orion and made assumptions. He wasn't blind. He didn't limp. His wounds were the kind you couldn't see in an X-ray or dress with bandages. He looked at Tyler, the young man behind the desk who didn't seem cruel, just ignorant, and perhaps that hurt even more. It wasn't malice. It was indifference. "This is a service dog," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice almost raspy from disuse. "Under federal law, you can't charge me a pet fee." The clerk hesitated, but pride made him stubborn. "I don't make the rules," he muttered. "I just follow what my manager tells me. You'll have to wait until morning to talk to her." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He could already feel the anxiety rising, the itching inside his skin, the pounding behind his eyes. The only thing keeping him grounded was the pressure of Orion's body against his leg. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, just watched and waited, Nathaniel thought about the options. There was another motel 15 miles back the way he'd come. He was exhausted, his head throbbed. His back ached from the long drive. Orion had begun to pant softly, sensing the stress in the air. They both needed rest. But the idea of arguing more, explaining himself again, drained whatever was left of his patience. He stepped back from the counter without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up. Nathaniel walked to the truck and opened the door. Orion jumped in silently, curling on the seat like he had been trained to. Daniel climbed into the driver's seat, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and leaned forward until his forehead touched it. His breaths were shallow. Dark was pressing in on all sides, but he didn't cry. Hadn't cried in years. He started the engine. The headlights carved a pale path through the darkness, but he didn't shift the truck into gear. Instead, he stared straight ahead, teeth clenched, trying to push the anger down. This wasn't the first time someone doubted him, but tonight it felt heavier. The anniversary of his cousin's death loomed over him, and now this refusal, this rejection felt like another blow to a body. Already bruised by memories, Orion sat up and placed his paw gently on Nathaniel's knee. It was a trained gesture, but it always felt like more, like understanding, like trust. And Nathaniel, though emotionally torn, rested his hand on Orion's head and closed his eyes. Minutes passed before he turned the truck around and parked at the edge of the lot, away from the lights. He wasn't going to drive back tonight. He would sleep in the cab. It wouldn't be the first time. Orion curled beside him again, and Nathaniel leaned the seat back, knowing he'd only get fragments of sleep. But at least he'd be left alone. Next morning the sun broke through with an unforgiving glare. Nathaniel hadn't slept much. He stretched his sore limbs and rubbed the stiffness from his neck. Orion was already awake, alert as always. Nathaniel stepped out of the truck and washed his face using a bottle of water he kept in the back. The hotel's lobby still had the same artificial scent. But the woman at the desk now was different, told her. With red-rimmed eyes and a name tag that read Manager Cynthia, she looked up from her computer and paused when she saw him, before Nathaniel could speak. She stood up and walked toward him. "Are you the gentleman with the service dog who came in last night?" she asked gently. Nathaniel nodded. He didn't trust himself to say more. She sighed and her face softened. "I am so sorry. Tyler should have known better. We've had training on this, and there's no excuse for how you were treated."
Nathaniel didn't respond right away.
His chest was tight. Her words were kind, but they didn't erase the hours he'd spent curled in the front seat of his truck, trying not to let the past consume him. Cynthia must have sensed that. "Please," she said, "let me make this right. We have a suite available, no charge, and I'll speak to him personally. He's not in trouble, he just needs to understand." This she motioned to Orion, who stood calmly by Nathaniel's side. "This is something we should all understand better." Nathaniel finally exhaled, long and slow. He nodded once. The room was clean and quiet. It overlooked the trees. And for a moment Nathaniel allowed himself to rest on the edge of the bed, feeling the tension bleed from his muscles. Orion lay beside him, calm and steady. They had fought another silent war and won. Not with fists or anger, but with presence. With endurance. Nathaniel awoke to a sharp knock at the door. Disoriented, he sat up, blinking at the filtered afternoon lights streaming through the blinds. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The tension in his spine, the silent press of dread, it all rushed back in like an old habit. Orion was already up, tail still, ears perked. His eyes locked on the door. Another knock. Nathaniel pulled on his jacket and approached the door cautiously. He opened it just a crack, expecting a cleaning. Staff member or another guest? Instead, a young woman stood there with a clipboard, awkward and unsure. She wore a name tag from the front desk's Amantha. Her eyes immediately fell to Orion, and then to Nathaniel's face. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, voice low and careful. "Cynthia asked me to bring you this. It's just the hotel's formal apology form and a gift card for your trouble. She also mentioned something about a local veteran center, said they might be a good resource." Nathaniel didn't take the clipboard. He simply stared at it, his jaw tight. Samantha hesitated. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but my dad, he came back from Iraq. He had a dog too, like yours. Never talked about anything until that dog showed up. Nathaniel's eyes flickered toward her. Just briefly. Enough to register the tremble in her voice. I didn't get it back then, she continued. He was always angry, always distant. I thought he just didn't care about us. But now I think maybe he just didn't know how to come back. Silence filled the hallway. It wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. Nathaniel finally reached for the clipboard. Thanks, he muttered, then shut the door gently. He didn't fill out the form. He didn't want a gift card. He didn't want pity. But he sat down on the edge of the bed, Orion curling at his feet, and stared at the pamphlet she had slipped. Between the papers, Blue Ridge Veteran Support Center, free drop-in sessions, no ID required, no appointments. He didn't intend to go. The idea of sitting in a circle with other men and women, trading war stories like baseball cards, made his skin crawl. But he tucked the pamphlet into the glove box of the truck later that evening, just in case. That night he took Orion for a walk around the edge of the small town. It was quiet here, unhurried, the kind of place that might have once felt like peace. But for Nathaniel, peace was a complicated word. It didn't mean absence of war. It meant learning how to carry it differently. They passed a diner with a flickering neon sign. A man in his 60s stood outside smoking, watching Nathaniel. With curious eyes, Nathaniel was used to the looks. This one was different. Less judgment, more recognition. You served? The man asked as Nathaniel passed. Nathaniel didn't answer. Kept walking. The man didn't press. Just called out as Nathaniel moved down the sidewalk. They don't train you how to come home, do they? Nathaniel stopped. Words hit like a punch to the gut. He turned slightly. The man didn't look away. Just flicked his cigarette into a rusted tin bucket and headed inside, leaving the door open behind him. Inside the diner, it was nearly empty. Old booths, coffee that smelled burnt, but warm, familiar in a strange way. Nathaniel followed slowly. Orion stayed close, scanning the room like always. They slid into a booth near the back. The waitress didn't ask questions about the dog. Just poured him a coffee and gave Orion a bowl of water. The man from outside sat a few booths over. He didn't speak again. Didn't even look at Nathaniel. But that night, for the first time in months, Nathaniel finished a cup of coffee in silence. That didn't feel like punishment. Back at the motel, Nathaniel lay in bed, eyes open. The soft rhythm of Orion's breathing was the only sound in the room. The encounter at the diner had unearthed something. It's something old and buried he dreamed that night, out of war but of before. Sitting in the backyard with his cousin Eli, just weeks before Eli shipped out. They were just kids back then, laughing over cheap beer, arguing about whose truck was louder. Eli had always been the light, reckless, loud, hopeful. And then the dream shifted. Eli was there, but older, dressed in uniform, iced hard, the laughter. Gone, you made it back, Eli said in the dream. Nathaniel nodded. But you didn't come home, Eli added quietly. Nathaniel woke up gasping. Morning came heavy and gray, clouds settling low over the hills. Nathaniel stood outside his motel room with a steaming mug of bitter coffee, watching Orion sniff around the curbside shrubs. His eyes were hollow but steady. Last night's dream haunted him still. Eli's face, his words, they clung to the edges of his thoughts like cobwebs he couldn't brush away. Orion paused, nose to the ground, pawing at something just off the walkway. Nathaniel moved closer, expecting trash or maybe a squirrel's trail. Instead, buried under damp leaves and an old newspaper, was a folded envelope, yellowed, water-stained, addressed in fading ink to Nathaniel Granger. Placed. He stared at it for a long moment. The handwriting, it was unmistakable. His hands trembled as he picked it up. The flap was still sealed, though barely. Had someone delivered it, dropped it, forgotten it years ago? Nathaniel went inside and sat down on the edge of the bed. Orion rested his chin on his lap, sensing something deep had shifted. With slow, reverent fingers, Nathaniel opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, written in messy but familiar script. Nate, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. Don't get angry. I know you. You're probably punching walls or yelling at the sky right now. But if I'm gone, it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. You were always the strong one, the one who thought ahead. I followed your lead even when I acted like I didn't. You kept me grounded. I owe you more than you'll ever know. Listen, if something happens to me, you have to promise me you'll come home. Not just physically, Actually come home. Sit on a porch. Drink bad coffee. Let someone love you. Let yourself feel things again. There's more to life than the battlefield. Don't let it be the only place you ever feel alive. I'll see you on the other side. Eli Nathaniel folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. For the first time in years, his face crumpled. He didn't wipe the tears. He let them fall, raw and unfiltered, like a dam finally breaking, all those years of silence. The guilt, the loneliness, Elias' words cut through. It all like sunlight cracking through clouds. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a plea, a mission. It hadn't known he was failing until now. The next day he drove, not anywhere in particular, just away from the motel, away from the stillness that had started to suffocate him. The open road unwound like a ribbon through the mountains. He turned the radio on for the first time in weeks. Static then, an old country song from his childhood. Orion leaned his head out the window. Wind tugging at his ears. They ended up at a park on the edge of a river. Families were out, kids chasing frisbees, old couples walking hand in hand. Nathaniel sat on a bench near the water and unfolded Eli's letter again. This time, he read it out loud. Orion didn't react, he just stayed close, his warm body leaning against Nathaniel's leg. Something inside began to soften. Not entirely, not suddenly, but enough. That evening, Nathaniel returned to the motel, took the Veterans Center pamphlet from the glove box, and left it on the nightstand. The next morning, he put on a clean shirt, combed his hair, and drove to the center. He didn't speak in the first session. Just faces like his, as that had seen things you couldn't describe, but there was comfort in the silence. He wasn't alone here, and for once he didn't want to be. After the session, a young man named Luca approached him. Probably 10 years younger, nervous energy, twitchy hands. "I liked your dog," he said. "Looks like he's seen some things too." Nathaniel nodded. "He, reminds me of mine. We had one in Kandahar. Didn't make it back." Didn't respond, but he patted the chair beside him. Luca sat down. They talked. Not about war, not yet. About dogs. About the silence that follows you even when the noise of war fades. That night, Nathaniel wrote a letter. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because Eli had done it first. Maybe because it was time he didn't have anyone to send it to. So he folded it, placed it under the motel room's Gideon Bible, and left a small note on top. For the next soul who feels lost. You're not alone. You're not alone. Weeks passed, and Nathaniel began to build a rhythm that felt like something close to living. Each morning, he woke at sunrise, brewed coffee strong enough to burn the fog from his mind, and took Orion on long walks through the fields that skirted the edge of town. He started attending the Veterans Center regularly. He still didn't talk much, but when he did, it mattered. One rainy afternoon, he brought Eli's letter with him. He read it to the group. The room sat silent afterward, not because they didn't know what to say, because every man and woman there felt what had just been shared. After the meeting, Luca, who hadn't missed a session since that first day, walked with Nathaniel to his truck. "Do you ever think about staying?" Luca asked. Nathaniel looked out at the mist-covered hills. Then at the center, where laughter and conversations still buzzed inside. "I'm starting to." By the end of the month, Nathaniel had rented a small cottage on the edge of the town. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms, a creaky porch, and a fire pit out back, but it was his. For the first time in decades, he unpacked his things one by one and placed them where they belonged. Eli's letter went into a frame above the mantel. Put up a mailbox, got a library card. Learned the name of the cashier at the grocery store. Her name was Angie. And she liked to give Orion free dog biscuits. People noticed him now, not in the way they did when he looked broken and distant, but in a way that felt human. He still had his shadows, he probably always would. But he had learned how to sit with them rather than run. One chilly evening in early November, Nathaniel hosted a bonfire. Just a small group, like a few of the guys from the center, even the town librarian who'd noticed his love of military history books. They brought food, old guitars, and stories. As the fire crackled, someone asked him, "What made you finally stop running?" Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He looked up at the stars. They were sharp and clear that night. "I got a letter," he said, "from a friend. a long time ago. Told me not to live in the war, told me to come home. Silence. The kind that carried weight, not discomfort. Luca leaned forward. Sounds like a good friend. Nathaniel's smile was soft and painful at once. He was the best. Later, as the fire died down and the others said their goodbyes, Daniel stood alone for a moment, looking out over the trees. Orion sat at his feet, warm and loyal. He pulled out a second letter, one he had written for Eli a week ago. Though he'd never planned to send it, he read it aloud quietly to the dark sky. Lie. I made it. It took me a long time to understand what home meant. But I think I found it out here, where the ghosts don't scream as loud, and people don't flinch when I speak from the heart. I've met others like us, still trying to fit into a world that moved on without us. And I'm helping them the way you helped me. I still miss you every day. I think I've stopped being angry. Thank you for everything. Your brother in arms, Nate. He folded the letter and placed it in the fire, watching as the flames turned the paper to orange, then to black, then to ash. The wind caught the ashes and carried them high, scattering them across the night like memories set free. Nathaniel whispered, "You're home too now." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he went inside, closed the door behind him, and slept through the night without dreams.